I was staring at my phone in complete disbelief, sitting in my corner office at Sterling and Associates, our family construction company. The text from my father, Thomas, read exactly what would change everything. "You're no longer my daughter. All future matters will go through our lawyer." My hands trembled as I processed these words. Just an hour earlier, I had closed a 6-figure deal with Henderson Development, the biggest contract our company had ever secured. I thought he would be proud. Instead, this message arrived because I refused to fire Marcus, my assistant of 5 years, simply because he once dated my sister Emma, and their breakup created family drama. I typed back, "As you wish," with shaking fingers, having no idea this single response would trigger a chain of events exposing 20 years of family lies and ultimately setting me free. The silence in my office felt suffocating after sending that reply. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the city skyline through my 20th floor window, trying to process what had just happened. My father had always been controlling, but disowning me over keeping Marcus employed seemed extreme, even for him. Something deeper was happening here, and I needed answers. I pulled up our company's financial management system on my computer. As the business development director holding 40% ownership, I had administrative access to all accounts and legal documents. My father controlled 60%, but I managed the day-to-day operations that actually generated revenue. Over the past 3 years, I had grown Sterling and Associates from a small regional contractor to a major player in commercial construction across the tri-state area. The first thing I noticed was unusual activity in our legal expenses account. Over the past 3 months, we had paid $15,000 to Morrison Law Firm. I recognized the name immediately. Janet Morrison was a family friend who had handled minor legal matters for us before. $15,000 for what should have been routine business seemed excessive. I dug deeper into the email server, using my administrative privileges to search for correspondence with Morrison Law Firm. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a hidden email account my father had created specifically for communicating with Janet about partnership restructuring and employee management issues. The emails painted a picture of months of secret planning. In one email from 6 weeks ago, my father wrote to Janet, "Cheyenne's emotional instability and poor business judgment are becoming a liability. I need to explore options for buying out her shares before she damages our reputation further." Janet's response suggested they meet privately to discuss gathering evidence of my supposed incompetence. The next email chain was even more disturbing. My father had been secretly recording our business meetings for the past 2 months, claiming to Janet that he was documenting patterns of erratic behavior and questionable decision-making. He was building a case to have me removed from the company I had essentially built from nothing. I scrolled through more emails and found a draft document titled Partnership Dissolution Agreement. The terms were insulting. My father planned to buy out my 40% ownership at 25% below market value, claiming the discount was necessary due to operational challenges I had supposedly created. The document cited specific incidents where I had allegedly acted against company interests, but every example was either taken completely out of context or outright fabricated. One particularly painful email discussed the Henderson Development deal I had just closed. My father wrote to Janet, "She thinks landing Henderson proves her value, but I've already told 3 other potential clients she'll be leaving the company soon. Once they hear about her departure, they'll want to renegotiate or cancel. This will support our argument that her presence creates instability." I felt sick reading these words. My father had been actively undermining my relationships with clients while simultaneously criticizing me for not bringing in enough business. The manipulation was so calculated, so deliberate, that I wondered how long this had been going on without my knowledge. Marcus knocked on my door and entered with a concerned expression. "Cheyenne, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned my computer screen toward him. "Take a look at this. Tell me what you think." Marcus read through several of the emails, his face growing darker with each line. "This is unbelievable. He's been planning to destroy you for months. And some of these recordings he mentions, I remember those meetings. You were completely professional in every single one." "There's more," I said, pulling up another email thread. This one discussed Marcus directly. My father had written, "The situation with her assistant provides the perfect catalyst. His history with Emma gives us emotional leverage, and his continued employment demonstrates her inability to make tough decisions for the good of the company." Marcus stared at the screen in shock. "So this whole thing was orchestrated. The demand to fire me, the family drama, all of it was designed to create a situation where you'd look unreasonable for standing your ground." I nodded grimly. "And if I had fired you, he would have found another excuse. This was never about you, Marcus. You were just a convenient tool to make me appear stubborn and unprofessional." We spent the next 2 hours printing and organizing every piece of evidence I could find. By 8 o'clock that evening, I had a complete picture of my father's strategy to force me out of the business. But as I prepared to leave the office, I realized something important. He had made a critical error. In his eagerness to build a case against me, he had documented his own deception in writing. Every email, every fabricated incident, every underhanded tactic was preserved in digital form. My phone buzzed with another text from my father. "Since you've chosen Marcus over family, you can deal with the consequences. Janet will be in touch about transition arrangements." This time, I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the most damaging emails to my personal account and created backup copies on an external drive. If my father wanted a legal battle, he was about to discover that I had access to all the same evidence he thought he was using against me. As I finally headed home that night, one thought kept repeating in my mind. My father had always underestimated me. He saw me as an emotional, impulsive young woman who would crumble under pressure. Tomorrow he was going to learn just how wrong he had been. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through everything I had discovered. By 5 in the morning, I was back at my kitchen table with my laptop coffee and a growing sense of determination. If my father thought he could manipulate me out of the company, he was about to face the fight of his life. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I started by calling David Wright, my mother's former lawyer, who had handled her estate when she died 16 years ago. David was in his 70s now, but still practiced law from a small office downtown. I had always liked him because he treated me with respect, even when I was just 12 years old, explaining legal concepts in terms I could understand. "Cheyenne, what a pleasant surprise," David said when he answered the phone. "Though something tells me this isn't a social call. I need to ask you some questions about my mother's estate, specifically the trust fund that was supposed to be split between Emma and me when we turned 30. There was a long pause. "I was wondering when you might contact me about that. Can you come to my office this afternoon? This conversation needs to happen in person." The anxiety in his voice sent chills down my spine. "David, is something wrong with the trust? Just come to my office, Cheyenne. 2 o'clock. I spent the morning continuing my investigation into the company finances. What I found was far worse than I had imagined. Sterling and Associates was not the thriving business I thought it was. My father had been using a complex shell game to hide massive debts and cash flow problems. New client payments were being used to pay bills from projects completed months earlier. Several major suppliers had put us on cash-only terms due to late payments. The company owed nearly $300,000 to various creditors, and my father had been desperately moving money between accounts to avoid defaults. Most shocking of all, I discovered that the recent success I thought I had achieved was largely an illusion. The Henderson development contract I had worked so hard to secure came with a payment schedule that wouldn't begin for 90 days. Meanwhile, the expenses for that project would start immediately. Without proper cash flow management, the contract that looked like our biggest success might actually bankrupt us. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from David Wright in his cluttered office, surrounded by law books and family photos spanning 5 decades of practice. His gentle demeanor couldn't hide the discomfort in his eyes as he pulled out a thick file folder. "Cheyenne, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear. Your mother's estate included a life insurance policy worth $500,000, plus her savings and investments, bringing the total to approximately $600,000. Half of that was designated for immediate family expenses and your father's support. The other half, $300,000, was placed in a trust for you and Emma." I felt my stomach drop. "Was placed in a trust?" David nodded grimly. "The trust was established with very specific conditions. Neither you nor Emma could access the funds until age 30, and only with proper documentation and my approval as the trustee. However, there were provisions for emergency withdrawals if both daughters provided written consent and met certain criteria." He pulled out a series of documents that made my hands shake as I read them. "Over the past 8 years, your father has made 17 different withdrawal requests from the trust. Each time he provided what appeared to be written authorization from both you and Emma, along with documentation of various family emergencies. The papers showed withdrawal after withdrawal: $25,000 for Cheyenne's medical expenses. When I was 22, $18,000 for Emma's educational costs, $35,000 for family home repairs after storm damage." The list went on and on, totaling nearly $250,000. "David, I never signed any of these authorizations. I didn't even know these withdrawals were happening." His face grew even more serious. "I suspected as much. The signatures always looked questionable to me, but your father was very convincing about the emergencies, and the amounts were within legal limits. I should have insisted on meeting with you girls directly, but Thomas was very persuasive about protecting your emotional well-being during difficult times." I stared at the forged signatures, recognizing my father's handwriting attempting to mimic my own. "How much is left?" "Approximately $50,000. And Cheyenne, there's something else. 3 weeks ago, your father contacted me about making a final withdrawal to cover what he called critical business expenses to prevent bankruptcy. He claimed both you and Emma had agreed to sacrifice the remainder of the trust to save the family company. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrifying clarity. My father hadn't just been planning to force me out of the business. He had been stealing from Emma and me for years to cover his own financial mismanagement. The family company I had been working so hard to build was actually being sustained by money that rightfully belonged to my sister and me. "I need copies of everything," I told David. "Every withdrawal request, every forged signature, every piece of documentation." David nodded and began making copies. "Cheyenne, what your father has done constitutes multiple felonies: forgery, theft, breach of fiduciary duty. This is serious criminal behavior. You need to understand that pursuing this will likely destroy your family." I thought about the text message that had started this whole investigation. "You're no longer my daughter." The family was already destroyed. I was just now seeing the truth of what had been happening behind the scenes. "There's one more thing," David said quietly. "Your father has been asking questions about the legal procedures for having a trustee removed." I think he's planning to challenge my authority and install someone who will approve whatever withdrawals he wants. As I drove home with a folder full of evidence, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Cheyenne, where are you? Your father showed up at the office with 2 men I've never seen before. They're going through your desk and taking files from your office." I tried to stop them, but they said they had legal authority. I felt a surge of cold anger. While I was discovering his theft and fraud, my father was trying to seize control of the office and eliminate any evidence I might have gathered. He had underestimated me again, not realizing that I had already secured backup copies of everything important. "Marcus, don't try to stop them. Just document everything they take and make sure you're safe. I'll handle this." "Cheyenne, there's something else. I overheard them talking and they mentioned something about freezing your access to the computer systems by tomorrow morning." That evening, I worked until midnight, systematically downloading and backing up every piece of critical business information I could access. Financial records, client contracts, employee files, supplier agreements, everything I would need to prove my contributions to the company and expose my father's financial mismanagement. As I finally prepared for bed, I realized that my father's text message had actually done me a favor. By cutting me off from the family, he had freed me from any obligation to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back with everything I had. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My father had given me 24 hours to process his ultimatum, and that time was now up. I had spent those hours well gathering evidence and understanding the full scope of his deception. Now it was time to act. My first stop was the bank where Sterling and Associates maintained our primary business accounts. As a 40% owner and authorized signatory, I had the legal right to freeze assets if I suspected fraudulent activity. Armed with David Wright's documentation of the forged trust withdrawals and my own evidence of business financial mismanagement, I had more than enough justification. Sarah Chen, our business banker for the past 5 years, looked concerned as I explained the situation. "Cheyenne, this is serious. If what you're telling me is accurate, we need to immediately secure all accounts pending a full audit." Within 2 hours, every shared business account was frozen. Automatic payments for my father's personal expenses that he had been charging to the company were canceled. His access to business credit cards was revoked. The company's country club membership that funded his weekly golf games was terminated. The lease on his luxury apartment that was somehow categorized as a business expense was marked for immediate review. I made sure to document everything with proper legal justification. This wasn't revenge. It was responsible business management in the face of discovered fraud. My phone started ringing almost immediately. The first call came from Henderson Development, our biggest new client. "Cheyenne, we just got a very strange call from your father. He said you were leaving the company and suggested we might want to reconsider our contract. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Everything is fine with our ability to complete your project excellently and on time. However, there are some internal family business matters being resolved. Can I schedule a meeting with you tomorrow to discuss the transition plan and ensure your complete confidence in our services?" The client agreed, and I realized that my father's strategy of undermining my relationships was about to backfire spectacularly. By reaching out to clients himself, he was drawing attention to internal problems and making them nervous about the company's stability. Over the next few hours, I received similar calls from 3 other major clients. Each time, I calmly explained that there were administrative changes happening, but that their projects remained the top priority. I scheduled meetings with all of them for the rest of the week. By lunchtime, my father was calling me nonstop. I let every call go to voicemail. In his messages, I could hear the progression from anger to panic as he realized the scope of what I had done. Cheyenne, what the hell do you think you're playing at unfreeze those accounts immediately? This is insane. You're going to destroy the business over some petty family drama. I'm your father. You can't just cut off access to money I need for legitimate business expenses. The last message was different. His voice was strained, almost desperate. Cheyenne, please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. There are things you don't understand about the business situation. Instead of calling him back, I decided to visit Janet Morrison's law office. If my father was going to communicate through lawyers, then I needed to understand exactly what legal strategy they were pursuing. Janet's office was in an upscale building downtown, all polished wood and expensive furniture designed to impress clients. When I arrived without an appointment, her secretary tried to turn me away. Ms. Morrison is in a very important meeting and cannot be disturbed. Please tell her that Cheyenne Sterling is here about the partnership dissolution case and that I have some questions about her billing practices. 5 minutes later, Janet emerged from her office looking flustered. She was an attractive woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, but with something nervous in her demeanor that I hadn't noticed before. Cheyenne, this is highly irregular. Your father and I are working on legal matters that don't concern you directly. Actually, Janet, since I'm the subject of the partnership dissolution, I think those matters concern me very directly. I'm also concerned about $15,000 in legal fees that my father authorized without proper board approval. Janet's face flushed slightly. Those fees are for legitimate legal work. Your father has every right to seek counsel about business matters, including secretly recorded conversations and forged documents. The color drained from Janet's face. I think this conversation should end here. If you want to discuss anything further, you'll need to retain your own legal counsel. As I turned to leave, I heard voices from Janet's office. The door had been left slightly ajar, and I could clearly hear my father's voice. Janet, she's frozen everything. I can't access any business accounts, and my personal accounts don't have enough to cover the monthly payments. You said this would be simple. Janet's response made me stop in my tracks. Thomas, calm down. We knew she might fight back initially. The important thing is that we stick to the plan. Once the partnership dissolution is finalized, you'll have full control of the business, and we can start our own company with those Henderson Development contacts. But what about the other situation? If she keeps digging into the finances, she might discover the trust fund withdrawals. And if Robert starts asking questions about Sarah's death. My blood turned to ice. Sarah was my mother's name. What did my father mean about Uncle Robert asking questions about her death? I quietly moved closer to the door, straining to hear more. Janet's voice was sharper now. Thomas, we've been through this. The accident was 16 years ago. There's no evidence linking you to anything questionable. Robert is just a grieving brother who never accepted that his sister died in a tragic accident. But if he hires that private investigator he's been threatening to contact, then we'll deal with that situation if it arises. Right now, our focus needs to be on the business matters. Cheyenne is smarter than we anticipated, but she's still just one person against an established legal strategy. I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly moved away, pretending to examine a painting in the hallway. When Janet emerged, she looked suspicious but said nothing as I left the building. Driving home, my mind was reeling. The conversation I had overheard suggested that my mother's death might not have been the simple accident I had always believed. Uncle Robert, my mother's brother, had apparently suspected something for years, but had never shared his concerns with Emma and me. That evening, I called Uncle Robert for the first time in months. He lived about 2 hours away and had always been somewhat distant from our family, which I had attributed to his grief over losing his sister. Uncle Robert, it's Cheyenne. I need to ask you something important. Have you ever had any questions about how my mother died? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Cheyenne, there are things about that night that have bothered me for 16 years, but I never wanted to burden you girls with my suspicions." "What kind of suspicions?" "The kind that could tear your family apart if they turned out to be true. But maybe it's time we had a conversation. Can you meet me this weekend?" As I hung up the phone, I realized that my father's simple text message about disowning me had started an avalanche that was about to bury 16 years of buried secrets. Whatever Uncle Robert suspected about my mother's death, I needed to know the truth. My phone buzzed with another text from my father. "Cheyenne, you're making a mistake that will destroy everything our family has built. Meet me tomorrow so we can resolve this properly." This time I texted back, "Our family was destroyed long before yesterday. I'm just finally seeing it clearly." The knock on my apartment door came at exactly 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, 3 days after my father's ultimatum. I looked through the peephole and saw Uncle Robert standing in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope and wearing an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of determination and deep sadness. "Uncle Robert, thank you for coming. I've been thinking about our phone conversation all week." He entered my apartment and sat heavily on my couch, the envelope resting on his lap like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Cheyenne, before I show you what's in here, I need you to understand something. Once you see this evidence, there's no going back to the way things were. Your relationship with your father will never be the same." I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "After everything that's happened this week, I don't think we have a relationship left to save. I need to know the truth about my mother." Robert opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of police reports, witness statements, and photographs. 6 months ago, I finally did what I should have done 16 years ago. I hired a private investigator named Michael Torres to look into your mother's death. He handed me the original police report from the night my mother died. According to the official account, Sarah Sterling was driving alone on Route 47 during a snowstorm when she lost control of her vehicle and crashed into a tree. She was found dead at the scene, apparently killed instantly from blunt force trauma. The investigating officer, Detective Raymond Walsh, concluded that icy road conditions and poor visibility were the primary factors in the accident. "This is what I remember from when I was 12, I said. "Dad told Emma and me that Mom was coming home from her book club when the accident happened." Robert's expression darkened. "That was the first lie, Cheyenne. Your mother never attended book club on Thursday nights. She attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings." I stared at him in shock. "Mom was an alcoholic." "Your mother had been sober for 3 years when she died. She was actually a sponsor for other people in recovery, including helping individuals whose families were struggling with addiction. She never told you girls because she wanted to protect you from that part of her past." Robert pulled out a witness statement that made my hands shake as I read it. A man named Gary Hendricks had been driving behind my mother that night and witnessed the entire sequence of events. According to his statement, Sarah Sterling was not driving when the accident occurred. She was a passenger in her own car, and the driver was a man who fled the scene on foot after the crash. "Gary saw a man walking away from the accident site," Robert continued. "He called out to him, but the man ignored him and kept walking toward the lights of Murphy's Tavern about a quarter mile down the road." I looked at the photograph Gary had provided to the police. It was blurry and taken from a distance, but it clearly showed a figure walking away from the crashed vehicle in the direction of the tavern. "Why didn't the police investigate this witness statement?" Robert's face grew grim. That's where the story gets even darker. Detective Walsh dismissed Gary's statement as unreliable due to poor weather conditions and limited visibility. He claimed that Gary was confused and that the figure he saw was probably an unrelated pedestrian or someone from the tavern walking home. The next document Robert showed me was a receipt from Murphy's Tavern time-stamped at 11:45 that night, just 23 minutes after the estimated time of the crash. The receipt was for 3 whiskey shots purchased by Thomas Sterling. Your father was at Murphy's Tavern within half an hour of your mother's death, drinking heavily and establishing what appeared to be an alibi. He told police he had been there all evening and learned about the accident when they called to notify him. My mind was reeling. Are you saying my father was driving when Mom was killed? I'm saying that all the evidence points to your father being in that car when it crashed, and that he left your mother to die while he went to establish an alibi for himself. Robert pulled out additional witness statements that the private investigator had gathered. 2 other people had seen a man matching my father's description walking away from the crash site that night. A waitress at Murphy's Tavern remembered my father arriving in an agitated state, muddy and disheveled, claiming he had fallen while walking to the tavern. Why would Dad have been driving Mom's car? Because according to what I've learned, your father had lost his license 2 weeks earlier due to a DUI conviction. Your mother had been driving him everywhere, including to his court-ordered alcohol counseling sessions. The irony was devastating. My mother, who was sober and helping others with addiction recovery, was killed while trying to help my father deal with his own drinking problem. There's more, Cheyenne. The private investigator discovered that the life insurance policy on your mother had been increased to $500,000 just 3 months before her death. Your father was having serious financial problems at the time due to his gambling and drinking. I thought about the trust fund money my father had been stealing over the years. Even in death, he had been profiting from my mother's tragedy while robbing Emma and me of our rightful inheritance. Uncle Robert, why didn't you pursue this 16 years ago? His eyes filled with tears. Because I was scared, Cheyenne. About a week after Sarah's funeral, your father came to see me. He told me that if I ever tried to cause problems for his family by spreading wild theories about the accident, he would make sure I never saw you girls again. He said he had friends in law enforcement who could make my life very difficult if I didn't mind my own business. Robert pulled out the final document from the envelope, a recent photograph that made my blood run cold. It showed my father meeting with a man outside a downtown restaurant. The private investigator had identified the man as Vincent Mallory, someone with multiple arrests for assault and intimidation. 3 weeks ago, Vincent Mallory broke into my house. He didn't steal anything, but he left a very clear message stop asking questions about old accidents, or the next visit wouldn't be so peaceful. I stared at the photograph, realizing that my father wasn't just a thief and a fraud. He was actively threatening people to keep his secrets buried. That's when I decided to come forward with everything. Your father may have been able to intimidate me 16 years ago, but I won't let him get away with murder while threatening my life to keep quiet about it. Just as Robert finished speaking, we heard a key turning in my apartment door. To my complete shock, Emma walked in using the spare key I had given her months ago for emergencies. Cheyenne, I need to talk to you about Dad, she said, then stopped abruptly when she saw Uncle Robert and the documents spread across my coffee table. What's going on here? Robert and I looked at each other, realizing that Emma was about to learn the truth about our mother's death in the most jarring way possible. Emma, sit down. There are things about Mom's accident that you need to know. As I explained everything Robert had discovered, Emma's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally an expression of recognition that chilled me to the bone. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I think I've been recording his confessions for months without realizing what they meant." Emma pulled out her phone and played an audio recording that made Robert and me stare at each other in complete shock. It was our father's voice, clearly intoxicated, rambling about that night when everything went wrong, and how he never meant for Sarah to get hurt, but she wouldn't shut up about the drinking. I've been recording him when he gets drunk because I was trying to understand why he's been so angry and unstable lately. I thought maybe I could help him if I understood what was bothering him." She played another recording where our father's voice was even more explicit. "I should have called for help immediately, but I panicked. By the time I got back from Murphy's with the police, it was too late to save her anyway." Robert's face was ashen as he listened to our father essentially confessing to leaving our mother to die. "Emma, how many of these recordings do you have?" "Hours and hours. And there's something else." Emma's voice became very quiet. "He's been talking about Uncle Robert a lot lately, saying things about how some people don't know when to leave the past alone." She played one final recording that made my blood freeze. "If Robert keeps pushing this investigation, he's going to force me to take care of the problem permanently. Vincent says he can make it look like a random robbery gone wrong." The three of us sat in stunned silence, realizing that we weren't just dealing with a decades-old crime cover-up. My father was actively planning to murder Uncle Robert to keep his secrets buried. "We have to go to the police immediately," I said. "This isn't just about justice for Mom anymore. Uncle Robert's life is in danger." Emma nodded grimly. "There's something else you both need to know. Dad has been asking me questions about your business activities, Cheyenne. He wanted to know if you had been accessing financial records or talking to lawyers. I think he suspects you're getting close to uncovering everything." As we prepared to contact law enforcement, my phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Family meeting tonight at 8 o'clock. Emma's apartment. Time to resolve this situation once and for all." Emma looked at her phone and saw the same message. "He doesn't know I'm here with you. He thinks he can manipulate us separately and control the narrative." Uncle Robert stood up with new determination in his voice. 16 years ago, I was too scared to fight for the truth about my sister's death. I won't make that mistake again. It's time to make sure your father faces justice for what he's done." Emma stared at her phone, then looked up at Uncle Robert and me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of fear and determined resolve. "There's something else I need to tell you both, something I've been too scared to admit even to myself." She took a deep breath and pulled up another audio file on her phone. "This recording is from 2 nights ago. Dad was drunk again, and he started talking about Mom's death, but this time, he said things that made me realize he knows I've been recording him." The audio began with our father's slurred voice. "Emma thinks she's so clever with her little recordings. She doesn't realize I've known about them for weeks. Maybe it's time she learned the whole truth about what happened to her precious mother." My heart sank as I realized that my father had been manipulating Emma just as cruelly as he had manipulated me. The recording continued with our father's voice becoming clearer and more sinister. "Sarah wouldn't stop nagging me about the gambling debts. She found out I had borrowed $50,000 from some very dangerous people, and she threatened to leave me and take you girls. She said she was going to contact a lawyer the next day to start divorce proceedings." Uncle Robert's hands clenched into fists as he listened to the details of that final night. "I was driving because I was too drunk to think straight, but I wasn't too drunk to realize what divorce would mean. She would get half of everything, including the business, and I'd be left with nothing but debt to people who don't accept bankruptcy as an excuse." Emma's voice broke as she continued explaining. "He confessed to everything in this recording. He said he grabbed the steering wheel during an argument and intentionally crashed the car, hoping it would look like an accident, but expecting they would both survive with minor injuries." The recording played our father's most chilling admission. "I never meant for her to die just to get hurt badly enough that she'd be dependent on me and couldn't leave. But when I realized she wasn't breathing, I panicked and ran. I thought if I could get to Murphy's and establish an alibi, no one would ever suspect me." Uncle Robert's voice was shaking with rage. "He murdered my sister because she was going to leave him for being a gambling addict and a drunk. Then he collected $500,000 in life insurance money and spent the next 16 years stealing from his own daughters. Emma wiped tears from her eyes and continued, "There's more. In the same recording, he talks about you, Uncle Robert. He knows you hired a private investigator, and he's been planning to have you killed to stop the investigation." She played another section where our father discussed his meeting with Vincent Mallory. Vincent says the best approach is to make it look like Robert interrupted a burglary. He lives alone, no close neighbors, and he's been acting paranoid lately, so people will assume he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I felt sick listening to my father calmly plan the murder of our uncle the same way he might discuss a business meeting or a golf game. "Emma, when is this supposed to happen?" "According to the recording, Vincent was going to do it next week, but then Dad found out about the business accounts being frozen and your investigation. Now he's moved the timeline up. He wants Uncle Robert dead before you can connect all the pieces and go to the police." Uncle Robert stood up and began pacing the room. "We can't wait for a family meeting tonight. We need to contact law enforcement immediately. Emma, these recordings are evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Combined with the private investigator's findings about your mother's death, we have enough to have your father arrested today." Emma nodded but looked terrified. "There's something else. Dad doesn't know I'm here with you, but he does know I've been asking questions about Mom's death. Last night he told me that if I ever betrayed the family by sharing private conversations with outsiders, I would end up just like Mom." The threat was unmistakable. My father was prepared to hurt Emma to protect his secrets, just as he had hurt our mother 16 years ago. I called David Wright, explaining the urgency of the situation. He connected us with Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in cold cases and domestic violence situations. Within 2 hours, Detective Santos was sitting in my apartment listening to Emma's recordings and reviewing Uncle Robert's evidence. "This is one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen," Detective Santos said. "Between the physical evidence from the private investigator, the witness statements, and these audio confessions, we have probable cause for multiple serious charges." She explained that they would need to move quickly to ensure Uncle Robert's safety and prevent my father from fleeing or destroying evidence. "I want to set up a controlled meeting where your father thinks he's manipulating you, but where we can record additional confessions and potentially catch him discussing the planned murder." Emma volunteered to wear a wire to the family meeting my father had demanded. "He trusts me more than Cheyenne right now because he thinks I'm just a confused young woman who doesn't understand what she's been recording. He'll be more likely to reveal details if he thinks he's convincing me to stay quiet." Detective Santos coordinated with the district attorney's office to prepare arrest warrants for multiple charges manslaughter in connection with our mother's death insurance fraud, embezzlement of trust fund money, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness intimidation. As we prepared for the evening's confrontation, Emma made a confession that broke my heart. "Cheyenne, I've suspected something was wrong with Dad's story about Mom's death for years, but I was so afraid of being alone in the world that I convinced myself to stop asking questions. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." I hugged my sister tightly, realizing that we had both been victims of our father's manipulation and intimidation, just in different ways. "Emma, you were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. And now you're being incredibly brave by helping us get justice for Mom." That afternoon, Detective Santos briefed us on the plan for the evening. Undercover officers would be positioned around Emma's apartment building. Emma would wear a wire and try to get our father to discuss both the historical murder and the planned attack on Uncle Robert. The goal is to get him to incriminate himself so completely that he can't claim the earlier recordings were taken out of context or were just drunken fantasies, Detective Santos explained. As 6 o'clock approached, Uncle Robert made a decision that surprised all of us. "I want to be there tonight. Not in the room, but in the building. If Thomas has moved up his timeline for having me killed, then hiding won't keep me safe. It's better to face this head-on with police protection. Emma left for her apartment to prepare for the meeting, wearing a wire and carrying the weight of our family's future on her shoulders. Uncle Robert and I waited in a surveillance van with Detective Santos listening to every word through Emma's microphone. At exactly 8 o'clock, we heard our father's voice through the wire. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm glad you agreed to meet with me. We need to discuss your sister's recent behavior and how it's affecting the family." What followed was the most chilling conversation I had ever heard. Our father spent over an hour systematically confessing to 16 years of crimes while believing he was manipulating Emma into helping him cover everything up. By the time the police moved in to make the arrest, we had recorded enough evidence to ensure that Thomas Sterling would never again be in a position to hurt anyone we loved. The arrest happened so quickly that I almost couldn't process what I was witnessing. Through the surveillance van's window, I watched as Detective Santos and 3 uniformed officers approached Emma's apartment building just as our father was leaving. He had spent 90 minutes confessing to multiple felonies while believing he was convincing Emma to help him destroy evidence and provide alibis. "Thomas Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Sterling, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and insurance fraud," Detective Santos announced as the officers surrounded him. My father's reaction was exactly what I expected. Immediate denial followed by desperate attempts to manipulate the situation. "This is ridiculous. I'm a respected businessman, and this is obviously some kind of family dispute that's gotten out of hand. Mr. Sterling, we have hours of audio recordings where you confess to causing your wife's death and planning the murder of Robert Hayes. You have the right to remain silent." As they handcuffed him, my father looked directly at the surveillance van where he somehow knew Uncle Robert and I were watching. The expression on his face was pure hatred, and I realized that any love I had ever felt from him had been conditional on my silence and compliance. Detective Santos returned to the van as they loaded my father into the police car. "The recordings from tonight give us everything we need for conviction on the serious charges." He explicitly described causing the car crash, leaving Sarah to die, bribing Detective Walsh to falsify the police report, and paying Vincent Mallory to kill Robert. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness as I processed the fact that my father would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. The man who had raised me was revealed to be a murderer and a sociopath, but at least he would never hurt anyone else. "What happens next?" Uncle Robert asked. "We're executing search warrants on his residence, his office, and Vincent Mallory's location simultaneously. We expect to find additional evidence of the conspiracy and hopefully prevent any other planned crimes." Emma emerged from her apartment building looking emotionally drained but determined. When she reached the van, Detective Santos praised her courage. "Emma, what you did tonight was incredibly brave. Your willingness to confront your father while wearing a wire provided evidence that will ensure justice for your mother and protection for your uncle." The next several hours felt like a whirlwind. Vincent Mallory was arrested at his apartment with detailed plans for Uncle Robert's murder, including photographs of Robert's house, his daily routine, and payment schedules for the hit. Detective Walsh, the corrupt officer who had falsified the original police report, was arrested at his retirement home in Florida. Emma and I spent most of the night at the police station providing additional statements and reviewing evidence. By dawn, we had a complete picture of 16 years of criminal activity that had destroyed our family and threatened our lives. The most shocking discovery came when police searched my father's office. Hidden in a safety deposit box were detailed financial records showing that he had been stealing from the business for over a decade, using new client money to pay old debts and gambling losses. The Henderson development contract I had been so proud of securing was actually worthless. My father had already spent the advance payment to cover debts to dangerous creditors. Your father was about 3 weeks away from complete financial collapse, Detective Santos explained. The business bankruptcy would have triggered investigations that would have exposed the trust fund thefts and potentially the murder cover-up. His plan to force you out of the company was his last desperate attempt to maintain control. I realized that my simple refusal to fire Marcus had actually saved my life. If I had complied with my father's demands, he would have successfully gained complete control of the business, continued stealing trust fund money, and eventually killed Uncle Robert to protect his secrets. My stubbornness had accidentally triggered the investigation that brought everything to light. Over the following weeks, the legal process moved quickly. My father's lawyer, not Janet Morrison, who had been arrested for conspiracy and embezzlement, advised him to plead guilty to manslaughter rather than face trial for first-degree murder. The evidence was so overwhelming that fighting the charges would likely result in a life sentence without possibility of parole. Janet Morrison faced her own serious charges. Police discovered that she had been helping my father launder stolen trust fund money through her law firm's accounts and had been paid over $100,000 for her assistance over the past 2 years. Her intimate relationship with my father had compromised her professional ethics and made her complicit in multiple felonies. The business implications were actually less devastating than I had expected. Most of our clients were sympathetic when they learned the full truth about the situation. Several major contractors in the area reached out to offer partnerships and support, recognizing that Emma and I had been victims rather than participants in the criminal activity. Uncle Robert surprised everyone by announcing his intention to move closer to Emma and me. I've spent 16 years living with guilt and regret about not fighting for the truth. I want to spend whatever time I have left being part of your lives and helping you rebuild. The trust fund money was recovered and restored, along with additional compensation from the insurance company that had paid out my mother's policy based on fraudulent information. Emma and I suddenly had the financial resources to completely rebuild Sterling and Associates as an ethical, sustainable business. Marcus, who had unknowingly triggered this entire chain of events by simply being a good employee, became our first partner in the restructured company. I can't believe that refusing to fire me led to solving a 16-year-old murder case, he said when we offered him an ownership stake. 3 months after my father's arrest, Emma made a decision that showed how much she had grown through this ordeal. She enrolled in a criminal justice program with the goal of becoming a victim's advocate for families dealing with domestic violence and financial abuse. Mom spent her sobriety helping other people recover from addiction, Emma explained. I want to honor her memory by helping families who are trapped in situations like ours. As my father's sentencing date approached, Detective Santos asked if Emma and I wanted to provide victim impact statements. We both declined, feeling that the justice system had already provided everything we needed: accountability, protection, and the truth. On the day Thomas Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in prison, Emma and I were not in the courtroom. Instead, we were at our mother's grave, finally able to tell her that justice had been served and that her daughters were safe, strong, and building the kind of life she would have been proud of. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the newly renamed Hayes & Sterling Construction Company, looking out at a team of employees who had chosen to stay with us through the most difficult period in our company's history. Marcus sat at the table as our new partner and operations director. Emma had taken over financial management, bringing a level of transparency and ethical oversight that our father never would have tolerated. Uncle Robert served as our senior advisor, contributing decades of business wisdom and the moral compass our family had been missing. The transformation had been remarkable. Without the financial drain of my father's gambling debts, embezzlement, and legal schemes, the business was actually more profitable than it had ever been. We had completed the Henderson development project ahead of schedule and under budget, earning a reputation for reliability that had generated 5 new major contracts. "I have an announcement to make," I said to the assembled team. "As of today, Hayes and Sterling Construction is officially debt-free. All legacy obligations from the previous management have been satisfied, and we're starting fresh." The applause from our employees felt genuine and heartfelt. These were people who had watched us navigate an impossible situation with integrity and transparency, and they had chosen to be part of building something better. Emma stood up next. "Cheyenne and I have also established the Sarah Sterling Memorial Foundation. We're providing scholarships for women entering the construction and building trades, with a special focus on single mothers and women in recovery." The foundation had been Emma's idea, inspired by our mother's commitment to helping others overcome addiction and build better lives. The first scholarship recipients were starting classes at the local trade school next month, and we had already raised enough money to support 10 women per year for the next 5 years. Marcus presented the latest client satisfaction reports, showing that our reputation for honest dealing and quality work was attracting business from across the region. "We've got more work than we can handle," he said with a smile. "It's a good problem to have." Uncle Robert had the most surprising announcement of all. "I've decided to sell my house and move here permanently. At 72, I've finally found the family I should have been part of all along." After the meeting ended, Emma and I walked through the office that had been completely renovated to reflect our new values. Gone were the expensive decorations and status symbols that our father had used to impress clients. In their place were photographs of completed projects, thank you letters from satisfied customers, and pictures of our scholarship recipients. "Do you ever regret how everything happened?" Emma asked as we looked at a wall displaying our mother's photograph alongside the mission statement we had written together. I thought about her question carefully. "I regret that Mom didn't live to see us build this company into something she would be proud of. I regret that we spent years not knowing the truth about her death. But I don't regret standing up to Dad, and I don't regret fighting for what was right." Emma nodded. "I used to be so afraid of being alone that I was willing to stay silent about things that bothered me. Now I realize that speaking up for the truth is the only way to build relationships worth having." Our father had been sentenced to 25 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 20 years. Vincent Mallory received 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Janet Morrison was disbarred and sentenced to 8 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Detective Walsh, the corrupt officer who had falsified the original police report, faced federal charges for civil rights violations and was looking at 10 to 15 years. The financial recovery had exceeded our expectations. Beyond the trust fund money and business assets, we had received settlements from the insurance company that had paid out my mother's policy based on fraudulent claims. The total amount allowed us to not only rebuild the business, but also to establish the Memorial Foundation and provide restitution to suppliers and employees who had been hurt by my father's financial mismanagement. Marcus had found love again this time with Sarah Walsh, a project manager from one of our client companies. Their engagement party was scheduled for next month, and Emma and I were both honored to be part of the planning. Emma had thrived in her criminal justice studies, maintaining a perfect GPA while working full-time at the company. Her professors were so impressed with her insights into family financial crimes that she had been invited to speak at conferences about her experiences. Uncle Robert had become the grandfather figure Emma and I had never known we needed. His presence in our daily lives provided stability and wisdom that helped us process the trauma of discovering the truth about our family history. The most unexpected gift had come from an investigation by the State Attorney General's office. They discovered that Detective Walsh had falsified reports in dozens of other cases over his 30-year career, and several families were finally getting answers about the deaths of their loved ones. Our courage in coming forward had helped solve crimes and bring closure to families who had been suffering in silence for decades. As Emma and I prepared to leave the office that evening, I received a text message that I had been expecting for months. It was from my father, sent from prison. "I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. Your mother would be proud too." I showed the message to Emma and we both agreed that we weren't ready to respond. Perhaps someday we would be able to have some kind of relationship with our father, but that healing would have to happen on our terms and in our own time. That night, Uncle Robert joined Emma and me for dinner at our favorite restaurant, a tradition we had established to celebrate our new family dynamic. As we raised glasses to toast another successful week, I reflected on how much our lives had changed since that devastating text message 6 months ago. "You know what I've learned through all of this?" I said to Emma and Uncle Robert. "Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are actually the ones holding us back from becoming who we're meant to be. Real love doesn't demand silence in the face of injustice." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "And sometimes losing the family you thought you had is the only way to build the family you actually need." Uncle Robert smiled with tears in his eyes. "Your mother always said that the truth has its own power, and that standing up for what's right takes more courage than people realize. She would be so proud of the women you've both become." As we walked out of the restaurant that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood, complete peace with who I was, and confidence in the choices I had made. The courage to fight back against injustice, even when it came from family, had set me free to build a life based on truth, integrity, and genuine love. The lesson I would carry forward was simple but profound. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to refuse to participate in lies, even when telling the truth costs you everything you thought you wanted. The courage to stand up for justice, especially when it requires standing up to family, can be the key to unlocking the life you were always meant to live. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for what's right meant risking important relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else find the courage to speak their truth. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and transformation, and share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in facing difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you have more strength than you know to build the life you truly deserve.